Hello everyone, this is I know I don't have my gloves on, hold on. Have to find it, but look, it's Wucky. I know, look, it's so adorable, look, it's playing music. I know, you're amazed by my grandeur. Okay, enough of that, shut up. Hello everyone and welcome to another beautiful recording. Welcome to another video. It is I, your host, your Lord, your Savior, your Prince of Pain, Media Fan. I am so happy to have all of my lords, my ladies, my wizards, my winners, my losers, my knights, my princesses, princes, whatever the hell you call yourself, and of course my rats. I'm so happy to be here with all of you today. I have a slightly different setup with the camera. I felt as though me sitting down all the time made the recordings even more dull. You know, but honestly, I'm happy to just try something a bit more different. I am honestly elated because I have a lot more room to work with this setup. I tried to, sit down, but you know what? I was like, sitting down, though it is quite real, it is honestly a little bit aggravating. You're sitting down, it's not good for you health-wise, and as a battle mage, a war mage like myself, I have to make sure that I am in somewhat of a good enough condition to act on my physical impulses, even if the situation may or may not demand it. But I'm happy to be here nonetheless. I'm happy to be here with all of you, with all of my followers. Hello! 5 people. But don't worry, I've seen a single mage take down a battalion. Numbers are hardly an issue, and I am just happy to be here. So, for those of you who don't know, this is a channel where I try to be as authentic as I possibly can be, while addressing current issues, though mundane as they are. Sometimes, the listeners or the followers who wish to discuss certain topics or themes that are going on in our current climate. But every now and then, I would like to bring to you some stories, some tales of grandeur, some tales of adventure, of passion and play and pain from where I come from. Yes, my realm. But today, I want to, I believe, just go into a few things. I feel as though I haven't really been enough forthcoming with all of you as to where I come from, how we do things in my realm. Even though I gave you a whole spiel about it that I believe no one really cared about it, I can't blame you. When you are, listening to someone just ramble on about something that you know nothing about, that you perhaps don't have an interest in, I can understand the sort of, the hearkening, sort of, the sort of distance from those sort of things that some would, deem educational, but others would consider rather boring. And I've been through that thing. And I know I'm trying to avoid that. I'm becoming a professor now within the magisteria, the academia, whatever you call it, for all of the hybrid students and the other students as well, the mage students. Pretty much anyone who's willing to learn under me. But, it is a growing process, and it is something that I'm quite excited about. So, recently, before I get into the things or whatever, I know in the previous video, I mentioned a few celebrities. I might go into some of those things. I try not to attack anyone. I'm just stating facts, okay? If you have a problem with fact, watch the videos and then come back to me. Things like musicians, things like, performers, or people that call themselves actors when they're just performers. I feel as though there has to be a certain distinction. You have a certain person that's just able to perform. That is the base of what they're able to provide for you. They are performing. In terms of acting, or I believe the quality of acting, is what determines whether someone is an actor or actress or whatever in their specific field. I have issues with certain artists that sort of aren't super expressive, and though it's not necessarily their fault, sometimes they are typecasted, other times it's simply the director's direction. Though some directors seem to have nothing, and they just allow the actors to just run amok with their acting. As long as they perform, that's all people care about. As long as Bruce Willis holds up a gun, that's all they care about. He can barely move his lips, and so they give him all these things in speeches and everything else. And honestly, look, I don't hate Bruce Willis. His daughter, I forgot what her name is. I don't hate or anything like that. I never really hate anyone, really. It's just, I use certain terminology, certain words, different kinds of formats that people may not find pleasing. But honestly, it says more about them than it does me. I'm simply here to give you my honest opinions and thoughts about certain subjects and issues that I believe need to be addressed. But, I know I mentioned those characters, and then I went into a brief thing at the end of the video about vampires, things that I told you I was going to perhaps bring up in this video. And I think I will, but I'll probably try to summarize as best I can. I understand that many of you will probably have your own things, or you already know about vampires. There's a whole history in your world based on the mythology about vampires, the practicing vampires that are currently in your world, in your realm. But I also have to preface the fact that, we have people of a similar kind where I come from, but their origins are a bit different. People that you understand as being one thing are someone else where I come from. And as I mentioned in other videos before, most of the reasons why you have tales or these myths of these certain creatures or these figures is because they were originally from my realm and they came over here and they sort of started a different life. And so when things got very bad, we had to intervene in certain parts of history. That is why you see the little to no evidence of these things, coming around. Everything is just word of mouth, things like folk tales or wives' tales. And so these are certain things that I try to, make sure all of you understand that a lot of what I tell you are things that do in fact happen and that did happen, but they were, in a different time, in a different place. And so I try to explain these certain things for all of you to simply enjoy, first of all, but also be educated, because education is very important. Hello, students. I'm watching all of you. You better enroll in class. Okay? I know all of you are watching me or whatever, but honestly, I actually got to meet a few of the students. I won't share their names because obviously we have to protect their, their identity with things like that. We have scouts that are going around issuing orders to, I guess, take some certain students and put them in custody because technically my school isn't being recognized yet by the state, but we are trying to change certain things. So we're not technically underground and we're not technically official, but we are sort of in the middle. We're just simply waiting for, just word. Honestly, that's simply what we are waiting for. But it's a lot to deal with sometimes. I try not to bring it up on this video because I don't want to bore all of you with the details. And I don't want to stress any of you out because, life is stressful enough as it is. And I believe the best way to cut that stress is to just take you to a different place. And by doing so, I want all of you to just follow me on the journey. Okay? So, I know all of you before, perhaps watched the video previously. And I mentioned a bit about vampires and I believe their origins. Is it something sinister, dealing with things like spirits, jinns, perhaps demons of some kind? Or perhaps is it something a bit more natural? Was it something that they just got from the landscape? Was it some interdimensional being that sort of came here by accident and was corrupted by the dark essences of the world? Or perhaps was it somehow a type of curse done by perhaps a mage of a certain caliber? Or maybe perhaps it was some sort of a virus or some sort of a bacterial infection, which is something that all of you are quite familiar with, especially in today's age. But I think the origins, I believe, to put it in a simple manner, they are all pretty much subjective. And they all pretty much derive from people who, I believe, find some sort of meaning or believe some correlation with the things that they tell people. There's certain evidence to say that, their origins were perhaps more sinister and dark. They had ties to sort of, spiritual forces. Other ones say that there are natural forces at work, and we see evidence of it in nature, so it's also supported. The other thing as well is something where perhaps it was done something as maybe a type of hex, maybe by a follower, or perhaps it was some sort of virus or anything like that. And you have movies like Resident Evil, so you can sort of see where it goes at. But as to how these sort of things came about, it is quite interesting. There's a lot of theories, a lot of things that I really don't want to get into, but I believe the two, I think, highly supported theories from where I come from are probably something I will be discussing, I guess, briefly. Because I would really love to just jump to something else. I tried to make certain things a two-parter, even though I didn't really go into the whole vampirism thing extensively in the previous video. But in this one, hello, hi. I know, it's amazing. Magic. And I believe that it is important to sort of, show you the similarities between these sort of things that I'm going to discuss. So I believe, like I mentioned in the previous video, I met a person who had a minor case of vampirism. It was a pseudo-vampirism. It was actually a hex given to them by a witch or I believe a mage of some caliber. And then I mentioned to you that there's also an origin that sort of ties those things together. So I will start with that one, because magic is something that's very pervasive in the world. It's something that is very strong where I come from, and there are many iterations. I apologize, and hexes that we can do that can simulate. I'm sorry. That can what's it called? Not simulate. That can what's it called? Well, I believe simulate. I believe sort of have similarities with what you consider vampirism. Okay. So the story is apparently there was a person, and this sort of kind of goes hand in hand. They had an issue with a person that was practicing magic or whatever. They talked about dark creatures and everything else. They accused the person of using things like death magic, which is technically a taboo. Things like necromancy, which is also a taboo. The person didn't like it, and so and I'm summarizing this. This is a gross summarization. But apparently, something happened where they sort of had a disagreement, and the magic practitioner delivered this curse upon this person, or a particular type of curse or whatever, because they were so obsessed with the dead, and sort of things that just happened. And so, later on, he started to develop certain tendencies that were mimicking those of the undead, which is a dark art form that is, taboo, that is sort of, not necessarily banned, but it is frowned upon in our society. And so it was something that surprised him, to say the least. He started, biting people. He couldn't help himself. A few people did die in the process. And so when we went to investigate certain things, we sort of identified the mage practitioner that casted this hex on this person. And we had to charge them with certain degrees of murder, these secondary manslaughter, things that you have similar in your world, because it was because of this hex that the person sort of came to this sort of, conclusion. The person themselves was not charged with any criminal act because they were not themselves, because they were under the influence of a certain type of spell. These sort of things happen. And sometimes the most sickest people use this loophole to get away with crime. So we sort of always go through, intentions. We go through eyewitnesses. It's a very extensive process. So that is one way that you're able to contract vampirism. The second one was the legend about the jinn, or perhaps the demon, or whatever it is, that have similarities to the origins of Dracula based on what you believe. But it is said that many years ago, there was a person, I think his name was Voratio, as I mentioned. The V, of course, is a coincidence. He was somewhat he was sort of like a battle mage like myself, or of a different order, of a different time. More ancient practices, things that we no longer do for, honestly, moral reasons. But he did a lot of, crazy shit back in the day. And so, he killed lots of people and everything else. So apparently, he wanted to attain a bit more power to, I believe, get him a seat upon the state, council, the state legislature. He was looking for complete domination over the country, not just this particular state. And he was not trying to defend just his country. Well, a country, he was trying to more so defend himself as personal things. He had sort of a superiority complex. He believed that everything should be his, that everything under his leadership is better. He had followers that were under him, that were, sort of disillusioned, and that were sort of deceived into believing that he was the sole answer. He was sort of like the Messiah. I believe the dark Messiah, for those people. And because he was very proficient in combat, he had certainly the physicality and as well the magical awareness to sort of back those certain claims. And so a huge investigation went underway and took place. I believe this happened a long time ago. I believe I said over 1,000 years or so. It was a long time. And so there was an investigation that took place. And so this ended in a couple of casualties, a couple of goring events, maulings by the undead and by anything else, because he was dabbling in, of course, necromancy as well. And so that sort of led to his power. And so this was happening after he had already, succumbed to whatever power. But apparently, when we interrogated, Voratio, according to the, the archives we have of scries, it is said that he had heard tale of a spirit of some kind that dwelled within, I believe, the deserts of, what the hell was the name? I'm telling you, it was a long time ago. But he went into a desert region. I think the desert region was called Enala. I think Enala, the Black Desert, so something like that. It was a desert that was, extremely vast, very potent in dark energies. It was a place that no one really went to except those who were depraved, or for those who were I believe dabbling in like the dark things. And it is said that within this place, um, in Allah, whatever I think I called it, it was a there was a small oasis. They said that the dimensions of the oasis was about, I guess, a football field big, so it seemed rather large. It could accommodate a large amount of people to a certain extent. However, the residents of that place were the undead. But it is said that within the sense of the oasis dwelled the spirits of great power. So he went there with a couple of men. None of them survived, only he did. And so when he finally confronted the jinn or quote unquote demon or whatever, it is said that it was sealed within a certain vase. Hello, it's a jinn. But they didn't have too much understanding of jinns back then. So so I had a seal and markings on it. He sort of opened it, and so then the jinn came out. And you know how jinns work. They work similar to things like demons. Some say they are demons. And honestly, I can understand the viewpoint, but that's not the point. He goes to talk to this jinn. He says, I have but one wish. I wish for power. I wish to govern this country, to take total domination. The power that I require necessary to attain, the influence and power that I want. But he did not specify for how long, and he did not specify what type of power. He was simply looking for it. The jinn, taking advantage of this man's hubris, gave him what he wanted at the expense of his own life. So he would no longer live as a mortal man, but as an immortal man, as a vampire. And so when this sort of power occurred, he was left, distraught. He didn't know what to do, but he was fully aware of the power that he had possessed. And because he was already a practitioner in the dark art of necromancy, the power was amplified 100-fold. So the entire residents of the oasis were brought to life by his hand alone. And so he had the intention of raising it as his army. And he did. And so he was, I guess, subjugating different land. The number of undead that he had at his disposal were in the legions. He had approximately, I believe, 10 to 15,000 undead at his disposal. An army of that size would certainly cause pause. And the fact that they were undead meant that they couldn't really be killed, definitely. It was a horrendous sight. He would go through the landscape, go through various lands, destroy everything, and sort of, make himself the ruler of that certain land. And he would appoint certain undead officers to oversee the living. The living didn't like it, but then they were stopped from leaving the place because he had full awareness that he needs a living population to, I believe, mine the soil properly. Now you ask why he couldn't just do it with the undead. It is because of the curse of the jinn. So the thing is that anything that he touched or his undead people sort of dealt with or whatever would cause the living thing to die. The only thing that wasn't really affected by the curse of the undead were things like rocks, inanimate objects, and extremely rarely certain creatures who were said to have been native to those areas or I believe adapted to areas where there was a lot of dark energy and death. And so he honestly couldn't do anything, and no one is going to trade goods with a country that has nothing going for it, that has no proper resources. So what he decided to do instead was he had to essentially isolate himself within the castle that he, overtook, and then he would appoint his undead officers to oversee the living. And then they would bring the details of the land to him. There would be things like trade. The issue the issue that came up later, however, was the fact that when other lords or kings or whatever heard of this new ruler and they heard rumors of undead, they automatically started amassing forces, amongst themselves to preparing for things like invasion. However, a few of those leaders were not mentioned by name because they have family ties that are still alive today. They may have had dark dealings or not with this lord because they can be incriminated based on that type of evidence. It is said that these sort of lords and leaders sent envoys and emissaries to this new land upon receiving letters and missives from the Dark Lord that they wish to do trades and that they have resources that they're able to trade or whatever. Now, the screening process was a bit extensive, so the kings that sent envoys forth had to send, I believe, the strongest of their men to oversee the deliveries and the packages. They couldn't send a larger force, and they couldn't send ordinary merchants either for fear of corruption and for fear of, the merchants bringing back toxic goods. Aside from the, people that they sent with the envoys, they also sent powerful mages who were knowledgeable in the dark arts as well as the defenses against it. So they had to do those certain things just to put in place to allow for the proper safety precautions. And so it is said that they went over there. They were extremely amazed by the sort of things. The necromancers among those groups were the press. They weren't really they were nonplussed about it because they were used to it. But it said that the knights and the soldiers had, they started developing goosebumps that was so bad they started to, I believe, erupt with blood. It was crazy. It was like it was said that like the goosebumps that they had on their body resembled like little mounds or mountains. Like it was almost like spikes, and so out of those spikes they would start bleeding. And so, honestly, like this was the influence of the dark forces that was there in that way. And so, you can't have a soldier leaking blood, even however minuscule. They can't have that. So the mages that were with them started to put wards down to protect their men that were with them at the behest of the lords and ladies that commanded them. So they were finally able to trade. They bought some goods back, and they did see that there were legitimate goods that were being sent. However, the testimony upon the knights that went to the cities and came back reported that the people there looked strange, that they looked like they were in fear. And so the very few lords and ladies that were, concerned about this sort of thing because they understood that it could happen to them, they started to talk to the Alchemical Society, which was a large society back in the day that sort of governed over the mage practitioners of the land, of the region. And so they heard voice of this, and so they sent forth mages like myself, as well as some prophets, which are big time, big time. They sent them forth to investigate, and they saw that the city was under the, I believe, oppressive force of a darker nature, of a dark inclination. They sort of sent a missive because they have to do things legally. They sent a missive to the Lord that their premises were going to be searched under the authority of the Alchemical Society, which was a big thing back then. He didn't respect authority. He thought he had the supreme authority. So he did a preemptive strike. He just gathered his forces and I believe left. He ended up killing the people that were there within his city, and then he moved on because he didn't want a direct confrontation with the Alchemical Society that governed all the mages within the land. Because the mages that were in the land had a sort of, there was I don't want to say a decree, it's like the licenses that they have to practice were under the derision of the Alchemical Society. So whatever orders that the Alchemical Society did, the mages were sort of obligated to act on this. And because there was a moral, a moral clause that was definite and that there was significant evidence for it, hardly any mages sort of opposed the idea. And so it is said that oh my God, this is so intense. So it says that that a cloud the size of a continent hovered over most of the nation. And it is said that the part that the clouds were sort of, I guess, cut off from reaching was the side where like the mages were standing. And the amount of mages that were present during that day numbered in like the thousands. It was the biggest war of the millennia. It was absolutely insane. So like the Dark Lord came forth, he had the power, and he tried to pretty much, he sent for legions after legions of undead. However, he underestimated his opponents. He knew that they were dangerous, but he thought he had the power necessary. But oh my God, it was you had to have been there. It's just this story. But needless to say, his forces were routed. He was then taken into custody, and then he was interrogated. And then executed. Because that's how these things go. So that was, I believe, the tale of Voratio. But it was insane. Like, there's so much more detail I could go into. But I was sort of giving you the rundown of sort of the juicy bits of the story. But it was honestly something quite astounding when you look at the scribe, when you look at the recordings, when you hear the recordings of the battles that took place like thousands of years ago. It was absolutely insane. So that was his tale, I believe, when it came to things like jinn. And I believe the more natural thing about the virus or whatever, that I will then go into as I believe the third option, is more so because, they say that, in the beginning when everything was, being formed or whatever, we have things like, different kinds of elements and energies, things like chaos being a theory of being an energy or whatever you believe chaos to be. And it was present during this time. And so it is said that, when the universe was being formed, all these sort of energies sort of commingling together. And and when they mingled together, they sort of gave birth to worlds in different dimensions. And so within these worlds and dimensions, in between them lived the creatures known as the Null, which are I guess, amalgamous forms of, I guess, material and energy. They are very bizarre, but they are sort of pale in color, and they essentially look like they sort of look like oblongs. Things like this. This some of them come like in this size or so. Some are a bit larger, but most cases, they are that form, mostly liquid in nature. And so and then upon seeing a creature or having contact with the creature, they are then able to mimic the creature's appearance and, I believe, composition entirely. A complete carbon copy. Unfortunately, sometimes, depending on the, I believe, nature of the energy that surrounds them within a certain area or universe, or I believe place that they inhabit, the world or whatever you call it, planet, whatever, it is said that they became corrupted, and the thing that they would copy, they would then devour, or believe that they would sort of corrupt themselves. And these sort of energies are sort of manipulate and are sort of govern the sort of regions of the dimensions of the universes, which I believe there are about 12 universes in total. I know you guys have things like 7, but there's 12 universes. All of them are quite different. There's only 2 that are quite similar, but they are essentially parallel to each other, and I believe they live. I believe they live, I believe, a universe apart. So there's a universe in between those 2. Some people theorize that the 2 universes that are similar together have a greater similarity to, I believe, the cosmic force that created everything. They believe that these 2 universes, whatever transpires in these universes, essentially bleed out into all the other ones. The one in the center of those 2 universes is known as the nullific universe, essentially the birthplace of the null. However, the null, because they're essentially the forces that separates these 2 opposing forces together, these 2 things that are similar, they have the, I believe, the ability, or believe the disability, to essentially traverse across the different universes or planes. But this is a rare occurrence. This sort of happens when the universes that surround the null universe come into contact, and these sort of rifts form, and these turn into bridges. And so when these bridges happen, the null sometimes traverse these bridges into those universes, and they are affected by those universes. But the null hardly survive those 2 universes. So in order for the null to survive, rifts are then formed, secondary or tertiary rifts form from those 2 universes that connect them to the other ones, and so they sort of spread out. But like I said, it's an extremely rare occurrence, because rifts don't really occur in those worlds often, hardly ever at all, because the law that governs the universes are substantially more strict than the ones that govern yours and mine. Okay, the veil there is incredibly thick. It is almost, you can literally touch the damn thing. It is like a wall this thick, made of like the hardest material imaginable. But sometimes rifts do form because the 2 universes are that powerful. But it is said that, these dark forces that govern the certain universes can corrupt these creatures known as the null when they go into it. And because they have the ability to, I believe, transform or mimic whatever they go, sort of like, what's it called? Copying, sort of procreating is sort of in their nature. So in order to preserve themselves, they're sort of like a parasite. If the original shell dies, they will seek to attain a new shell that perhaps can, keep their existence going, because the null have to exist. That is just their nature. They just exist. So these creatures are informed. And I'm sorry if I'm boring all of you. It's a long explanation, but I'm almost done. So when the null are formed, they sort of go into the nature, and they try to find their ways back to the original place, but they can't do that. Unfortunately, when they're under the influence of the dark forces or any force there, their impulses change in order for them to survive within that realm, because then the laws of the realm then take over and subjugate the null under the laws of that place. And so if it's a darker sort of energy that they come into contact with, then they sort of inherit the abilities and, I believe, the tendencies of the dark. And so then they, develop things like, things like claws or maybe harsh features. They seek to devour things, killing sprees, all those sorts of things happen. So the belief also is that the original vampires, I believe the ones that you call vampires or know as vampires, were nulls that were sort of corrupted when they came into the other realm. And the reason why they're so hard to kill and have these sort of crazy powers, I believe, sort of supports that theory. But like I said, these sort of theories are the ones that are mostly believed in. There's things like the virus theory as well, that it was something that was contracted. I believe some say by a null, or perhaps by something in nature that was corrupted by the dark forces, and sort of manipulated its composition in a way for it to act as a vampiric cell. And so when the vampiric, cell then, went forth into another person, a being, an organic creature of some kind, corrupted them, and sought to, seek survival in numbers. And so by doing so, it allowed the original cell to then, sort of procreate, but sort of, make more of itself to, for protection, to make its own community, to ensure that its type survives at all. So those sort of things sort of make sense, but it's quite interesting when you think about it. But let me know what you think about it. I know it's a lot of things, a lot of things to think about, but when it comes to these sort of things like, theories on vampires and how they came into being, it is quite fascinating. But without further delay, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for being here. I should hope you like the little intro music. I have another song that I believe I will show you, and I have a means of, for all of you to hear it. I'll perhaps play it in the next video. Who knows? But I want all of you to be well, to be kind to your animals, your family. Make sure you feed them. Even your brother, you keep locked in a cage. Remember that I care for you, that I love you, that Pahalu cares for you just as much as I do, if not more so. And that whatever you're doing, whether it be practicing, your craft or even sex, make sure you do so in safety and make sure you do so in the appropriate way possible. Unless you're in a place that doesn't care, then, you are up to your own devices. But remember that I care for you, that, Pahalo cares for you, that our community, our family is here if you should ever need us. And remember that on this channel, we seek to make the mundane magical. So without further more delay, goodbye, and I hope to see you in the next one.